Professor Dov Waxman, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to Viewpoint. How do you think the incoming Trump administration will approach the situation in the Middle East, the war in Gaza, compared to their predecessor?
Well, I think clearly the Trump administration are going to want to have the ongoing war in Gaza off their plate as quickly as possible. But I fear that their approach to that isn't going to be one that's going to be aimed at a sustainable solution in Gaza or in Palestine more broadly, but one that's going to essentially accept the Israeli government's terms, namely long-term military occupation in the Gaza Strip. I think that's something that the Biden administration weren't willing to countenance, and I think the Trump administration will be more willing to do that. They've already been behind the scenes pushing for the ceasefire in Lebanon, so clearly the Trump administration want, as President Trump, but these wars over. He wants to focus on his domestic agenda, but I think despite his desire to avoid the Middle East, the region has other plans, and now of course there's the very fast developing situation in Syria that they're going to have to contend with as well.
I mean, he's also said, Donald Trump, he's warned that there will be all hell to pay if the hostages are not released before he assumes office. What do you think he means by that?
Well, it's always hard to decipher Trump's bombastic statements. I mean, I think he makes these kinds of remarks often kind of off the cuff. I think it's an attempt to intimidate Hamas's leadership and other states in the region to try to put pressure on Hamas to accept a deal. But I can't see really what he has in mind, whether he's going to do anything differently to try to achieve that. In particular, given the fundamentally irreconcilable positions of the current Israeli government and the Hamas leadership regarding the long-term presence of the Israeli army in the Gaza Strip.
Where is Israel heading now?
Under the current government, I fear it is heading in a very dangerous negative direction. I mean, it's clear that the government is planning for, I think, a long-term military occupation of the Gaza Strip. There's now a lot of enthusiasm within the Israeli government for the potential formal annexation of the West Bank. And on top of that, a renewed push to undermine the power and independence of the Israeli judiciary as a kind of long-term process of basically democratic backsliding in Israel. And so I think both within Israel, in terms of the future of democracy within Israel, as well as the prospect for any kind of peace or stability in the West Bank or in Gaza, it's looking very, very bleak with the current Israeli government. And right now, there doesn't look to be any likelihood that that government is going to fall anytime soon, because Prime Minister Netanyahu has made it clear that he continues to rely upon his far-right coalition partners. And with President Trump coming into office, I think he feels even more confident of his ability to remain in power.
What are the consequences of this for the Israeli people?
Well, I think, first and foremost, I think the consequences, I think of the consequences for the families of those who are held hostage in the Gaza Strip, who want a ceasefire, who want a hostage deal. But more broadly, I think the idea of kind of permanent annexation of the West Bank is not something that the majority of Israelis support, nor is the idea of a long-term military occupation of the Gaza Strip, let alone the potential for the establishment of civilian settlements there. So this government was not popular before October the 7th. It was even less popular after October the 7th. And I think there is a real alarm and fear, certainly among more liberal Israelis and those who care about the future of Israeli democracy, about the direction that the country is going in under the current government.
How dangerous is this period now before Donald Trump is sworn into office? He has really emphasized his intention to remove America from being sucked into any long-term conflict in the Middle East. How might that be weighing on the mind of Benjamin Netanyahu? Might there be a sudden escalation, or an attempt to position himself in a way that locks America into supporting Israel, regardless of whether or not that's the direction Washington wants to go in?
Well, I think the big question obviously will be with regards to Iran and whether the possibility, whether Netanyahu may be encouraged to think that somehow he can bring the United States into a direct conflict with Iran over its nuclear program. That, I think, is the biggest risk. But on with regards to the Palestinian issue, yeah, I mean, it's fundamentally not as dissimilar from the Biden administration. The Biden administration, you know, certainly rhetorically is very different than what the Trump administration is likely to be. But in practice, they haven't been really willing to use US leverage to restrain the Israeli government. They haven't really done a great deal. They've enacted some sanctions on most violent settlers, but there hasn't really been any pressure to constrain the Israeli government. And so I think Prime Minister Netanyahu's already feeling like he's outwitted or outmaneuvered the Biden administration, and now with Trump coming in, he's going to be even more emboldened.
Professor Dov Waxman, thank you very much.